Right. So hi, I'm Annie, or Annalise. There you go. Thank you. Yes, so my background is not at all in this at all. I am actually a theoretical scientist. However, I do have experience in designing tabletop role-playing games. And actually, all three of us have experience designing tabletop role-playing games using tarot in some respect. So, for example, with Zoheb's game, Big Night in the Perfect World after the DJ Shadow track, uses the major arcana in an inspirational way to generate character and relationship concepts. Holly's game Corpse and King uses tarot as prompts and as reflection. And I am considering using tarot as a resolution mechanic, as per this PowerPoint, to resolve situations within a game context. So all of these games have varying concepts and aims, and therefore we use the tarot as a very utilization. So in essence, we have uncertain or risky situations presented to us within tabletop role-playing games. These, therefore, require resolution, and we will therefore require a resolution mechanic for them. These will often use some sort of random element for fairness, for chance, etc., etc. These may be modified pre or post-random elements to model favorable outcomes and circumstances or unfavorable outcomes and circumstances. We see some games have moved away from the traditional use of dice into using the tarot. So we use two case studies, Anamnesis and His Majesty the Worm, in order to model this and explore this trend. So TTRPGs are now incorporating the tarot due to its occult significance in contemporary culture. We see contemporary subcultures incorporating tarot from its beginning as a mundane game and occult meaning together, and further imbuing them with ritual and mysticism. We see this integration into games lending it this more mundane meaning, especially if a resolution mechanic occurs multiple times within a session of play. And then we see this potential return to the original introduction as a game. So, in Dice and the Devil, we see rolling dice has a history of occultism due to luck, putting fate in the hands of something unnatural, as well as this divination element and pagan association, for example, throwing runes. Furthermore, the Satanic Panic in the 1980s also suggests that TTRPGs were partially targeted over dice. For example, in D&D, you roll 3d6 for your stats. 3d6, 666. Yes. And we all know, and tarot, though, has the complete opposite history. We see its emergence from card games in 15th century Italian courts, and then in English-speaking culture as an occult tool in the early 1900s. However, we do also see some commentators on tarot deny this history, believing that instead it originated from ancient Egypt and ancient Greece, especially with its symbolism, ascribing this kind of lost occult meaning to it. So, for a quick bit of history, so for context, we see in 1371, the first recorded use of playing cards in Peter IV of Aragon commissioning a deck. Then in 1377, we see this description of what we now recognize as playing cards in Switzerland. So we can see this kind of spread across Europe in the early 14th century. This is then echoed by religious doctrine go, no, we hate playing cards, idle hands to work with the devil, do good things with your life rather than gambling. Move forward to the 1400s, we see disposed reported account of tarot in the estate court of Ferrara in northern Italy. And then also in northern Italy, we have this fresco, the Tarocchi players, in Milan. This kind of suggests this popular interpretation as a game, rather than anything else. This tarot as a game becomes popular in Europe, but importantly, not in England. And let's move forward quite a couple of hundred years to England and towards the publication of the Rider-Smith Waite tarot deck. So I'm going to call it the Rider-Smith Waite tarot deck because it was published by the Rider Publishing House, but Patricia Smith and Arthur Edward Waite were the ones who actually designed it. So from now on, it's going to be called the RSW Tarot deck. So you may know it as the Rider-Waite deck. We also see Alistair Crowley, who is another member of this secret society that these two belong to, publishes his Book of Thoth in the 1940s. And the Thoth Tarot, which does differ very slightly, in fact, is then published as a deck in 1969. So we see this kind of Victorian and Edwardian fascination with exotic mysticism, with ancient Egypt and ancient Greece. These are particularly relevant here. Fast forward to the 1980s, and we've got our Satanic Panic. So again, it's targeting occults, ephemera, and TTRPGs for their demonic elements, contacting to bed, ungodly associations, etc., etc. And now we see these subcultures that utilize tarot. So New Age practitioners coming online, witch talk, algorithm targeting tarot readers. For example, this morning on my Instagram reels, I had Madame Adam come up and go, if you're seeing this, the algorithm has brought me to you. This tarot reading is for you. We also see it not just in this kind of witch talk, New Agey space, but also in meme culture. So for example, JoJo's Bizarre Adventures, Stardust Crusaders, the stands, the magical powers in JoJo are named after tarot cards. So I don't know if any of you are familiar with Zabmarudo. That's the world, the last tarot card in Major Arcana. Furthermore, we also kind of see it in Marvel properties. So the recent Agatha All Along has a whole episode focusing on tarot as a way of telling the story. So the question is now, is this a game? Is it an occult tool? Is it something both? Is it something now completely different? So we see this dominance of tarot as an occult tool from the Rider-Smith-Waite deck, which was originated by two members, Waite and Smith of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. And I'm using this as this demarcation between game and occult tool, but I would like to recognize this is quite an Anglo-centric view, since we don't in England have the same history of tarot as a game. However, it does originate in this secret society, which interestingly, Alistair Crowley spoke all the secrets about in 1905, got chucked out, did his own thing, and published his own tarot deck. Later, we also see tarot then have this important place in digital subcultures in both solitary and communal witchery. So it's all about interfacing and interacting with fate, with reflecting upon your own actions and guidance for the future. Now we see the tarot and begin to kind of link these two distinct subcultures of witchcraft and TTRPGs. This interface at these particular points, so both the communal and creative endeavors both have these kind of intellectual elements, and they're both something kind of niche. So we're focusing on Anamnesis and His Majesty the Worm. So Anamnesis is a solo journaling story game, while His Majesty the Worm is a party-based dungeon crawler with the traditional pool player and GN dynamic. So Anamnesis is a solo journaling game which are played within a few hours, single sessions. So you will journey throughout one session of maybe 2 to 3 hours in this game. So you'll play a character called PC is an amnesiac. So you uncover facts about your PC throughout the game by encountering situations, and these situations are prompted by the drawing and the interpretation of tarot cards. And these cards are then associated with specific questions and prompts which you interpret and write about. So the tarot deck is split into 5 decks, one per suit and one for the major arcana. And the game proceeds in 5 acts. The first 4 are named for minor arcana suits, and upon reading the designer's commentary of the game, these suit names were actually used as placeholders before the designer had some sort of attachment to them and published them as such. So you draw from these suits in 3 card spreads in kind of the classic past, present, future spread that we see a lot in pop culture. And the major arcana themselves are used then as further context for that prompt. You use the major arcana to answer the question. We then also see in the final act, you have a shadow that's been following you the entire game, which is a major arcana you begin with. You discard that, and the new major arcana that you draw, you actually choose. This kind of lends more theory to the kind of unique characteristic nature of the major arcana, which is sort of the draw of a lot of equal to tarot over standard playing cards. So we see anamnesis engages with the specificity of the tarot, so the meaning of the card and the font. But you also see as well this open-endedness. Everybody's going to answer that question differently, depending on the context, depending on the mood they come to the table with, depending on what questions they want to answer during the game. So there's little really in terms of engagement with the actual occult meanings behind the cards, but then again, it's going to be a little bit difficult to have prompts that interface with both the occult meanings and also what the designer wants you to experience during the game if you had an open-ended enough question that you can come up with an interesting enough answer to every time. However, you do see this journey of discovery mapped onto the game that is also mapped onto tarot cards and the hero's journey, the numerological values that go on this cycle of continuing onward, as well as discovery. So, in comparison, we've also used His Majesty the Worm, which is an OSR, an old school Renaissance game that's inspired by Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. It's a game that uses a traditional GN, Game Master role, and multiple player characters, each played by one character, by one player. So it uses tarot to resolve situations, and there's a certain influence of tarot throughout the design, aesthetically as well as inspirationally. So within His Majesty the Worm, you are exploring a member dungeon underneath the city, and you're guided by your game master throughout this. So we separate the minor arcana and the fool from the major arcana at the start of the game. So the major arcana are used exclusively by the GM getting the nice pretty parts, and the minor arcana are used by the players for tests of fate, which is what we call the central resolution mechanic. So if there is an uncertain or risky situation, there is often a test of fate going on in that situation. So each suit is mapped to different types of challenges, but also aspects of the PC. So these are adapted to the genre and reintroduced. So for example, the suit of swords is used to mean intelligence, the masculinity and air in traditional tarot reading. This has been reinterpreted for a dungeon crawler to be skill with weapons, which is a very useful skill indeed when we're dungeon delving, and strength. So there's some kind of reinterpretation through the lens of dungeon crawling going on here. The numeric values are overall more important in His Majesty the Worm than the kind of suit that's drawn. However, you can succeed. So you're essentially, when you do a test of fate, you draw a card, add a number that's associated with that card to your characteristic that is being tested. If you get to 14, you've succeeded. But however, succeeding can also be enhanced by drawing the same suit of the challenge that's occurring. So for example, if you draw the 4 of Pentacles and you're doing a Pentacles test, that's good, you get an additional benefit. Furthermore, the game also encourages the GM to ask the PC to describe how they proceed or how they fail based on that suit's values. So otherwise, though, the symbol of some of the cards doesn't actually mechanically have an impact. We also see in the GM section, meat grinder table, of obstacles to introduce during a dungeon crawl, the numeric value of the major arcana, or the Roman numeric value, is used over the names. So for example, the sun, XIX, number 19, is shown as XIX in the table rather than the sun. These are used to represent obstacles, but mostly these obstacles are very much interpreted for a dungeon. There's some inspiration from the cards, itself, but it's mostly for only a couple of the prompts that I managed to see. So for example, using the sun again, the sun means youth, wisdom, naivete, and the entry on the table for that are all Hululans. We're just having some fun. So there's certainly this kind of tension in between the concrete draw of His Majesty the Worm and the interpreted draw of tarot readings. So we see this kind of clash with the abstract interpreted nature. So for example, 4 in a test means a 4 literally else, whether it's swords, cups, or the emperor. And all of those cards have very distinct meanings based on where they appear in a tarot reading. There are also alternatives given because, as McCrell writes, tarot is quite inaccessible, it's an expensive hobby to pick up. But he gives far more convoluted ways of using dice or playing cards as well as tarot decks in a bid to become more accessible to a greater and wider audience. However, importantly, tarot is aesthetically very crucial to His Majesty the Worm. We see McCrell engaging with the meaning, the art, and the feats of tarot in his layout as well as his designer notes. So if you were to buy a copy of His Majesty the Worm, he has in the margin his particular notes about why he's chosen certain phase, about what goes on in his head when he was designing this game. So first of all, let's start with the title. His Majesty the Worm itself, the phrase, comes from a novel by Italo Calvino, The Castle of Cross Destinies, which is a novel that is told through 2 decks of tarot in 2 parts. So the first part is written in the way of drawing cards from the Visconti deck, while the second part is narrated drawing cards from the deck Marseille. We also see in the layout itself here, just as a really quick example, it engages with both the art and the meaning. So first of all, we see in between the city and the cruel, the 10 of Pentacles, also known as the 10 of Coins. So we see these many coins, the city in the background, right by the city phase. We then see the burden of the 10 of Wands in between cruel and city, somebody burdened with all these sticks and treasures found through their crawl into the dungeon, going towards the city in the distance. But it does also go in about meaning. So for example, we see the 8 of Wands, which is about abandoning the past and traveling onward, up there with challenge and cruel. There's in between challenge and camp, the 10 of Swords. After a long day in the dungeon, pierced through with enemies abandoning, you're tired, you have collapsed. The meaning of the 10 of Swords there. So, in essence then, the takeaway points from this presentation I'd like you to consider would be that the occult meanings and the aesthetic of tarot, especially the major arcana, kind of appeals over playing cards when it comes to tabletop role-playing games. However, we see both of these cases that I've demonstrated interface differently with the tarot due to the genre and the aims of the designer. So in general, TTRPGs require different things from tarot, making it more common as inspirational, but also they do combine the occult and game into this kind of new identity that's going forward into the world as it is. So thank you very much.